So then, time to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and Annabel Denham, the Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. They'll be with us from now until midnight. Very good evening to both of you. We'll chat in a moment. First of all, let's check out those front pages for you, starting with The Observer, leading with a warning from scientists that falling trust in Boris Johnson could harm measures to prevent the surge of Omicron cases and hospitalisations. Well, a cabinet revolt over new COVID restrictions adds to the Prime Minister's woes, writes the Sunday Telegraph. It's a make or break week for Boris Johnson, says the Sunday Express, with all eyes on COVID restrictions and an upcoming crucial by-election. Well, the Mirror has a picture it says was taken on the 15th of December last year, showing the Prime Minister hosting a Downing Street quiz. The paper adds that, according to a source, it was purely a social event. The Times reports healthcare staff have been told to start preparing for the mass vaccination of primary school children. And the Star has a story about former professional footballer and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here contestant David Gilliler. And we're joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Annabel Denham. Very good evening to both of you. Nice to see you. Right, lots to get through then this Saturday evening. Why don't we start with the front of the Express, Christina. It's make or break week for Boris Johnson. It certainly is, isn't it? He's got that crucial vote in the Commons on Monday, and then he's got a by-election to contend with on Thursday.
Yes, well, nobody can accuse the Prime Minister of having had a boring time recently or of boring the nation in any way at all. I think many of us never actually want to hear the words Boris Johnson ever again. What amuses me about the story, and to be honest, not very much amuses me about this whole business, but what does amuse me is that this straw that seems to be about to break Tory MPs' back is in fact about doing things that will keep people alive and keep the NHS from collapsing, rather than the stuff that is absolutely unforgivable, like hosting parties in Downing Street when the rest of the nation was in a very strict lockdown and when people literally couldn't say goodbye to loved ones who died during this time. So, as we know, Tory backbenchers are very, very exercised at the thought of having to wear masks and possibly having to show COVID vaccine passports and all kinds of things. I mean, none of us like these things. It's absolutely awful to think of more restrictions coming, and the idea of any lockdown just makes my heart sink. Let's hope and pray that's not necessary. But it does seem to me that Tory MPs get exercised about entirely the wrong things.
Yeah, Annabel, front of the Sunday Telegraph, same story. PM faces cabinet revolt over COVID rules. I mean, we know the vote will go through because it's got Labour support, but they're angry about Plan B. Already the scientists are saying that Plan B isn't strict enough and we need to go to a Plan C.
Well, yes, I think cabinet ministers in particular are now very worried about a slippery slope, and you can't really blame them given MPs haven't yet voted on Plan B, and here we are talking about Plan C, some kind of tougher crackdown, even a dreaded fourth lockdown. So it's not entirely surprising. For much of this week, we've been talking about those 60-odd Tory MPs who are going to rebel against one or all of the new restrictions. I think they're taking particular exception to vaccine passports because many Conservative MPs view them as anathema to a free society. And of course, they haven't worked in a lot of countries that have introduced them. So there's very little evidence to suggest that this measure will actually make a big difference in stemming the transmission of the Omicron variant. In fact, what I've been reading lately suggests that the R number for Omicron could be as high as 4. So these non-pharmaceutical interventions just simply aren't going to make a big dent in the number of cases. There's also the issue that a lot of members of the public, a lot of politicians are very worried with this narrative that we have to live our lives or have our lives dictated to us. And it's always framed in how we can shield and protect the NHS. And really, it ought to be about how the NHS can protect us. And I think ministers, they are worried about the increased pressure on the NHS. We know that the NHS runs at very high hospital bed capacity during the winter, even in non-COVID times. times at the moment. It's about 95%, just under 95%. Some ministers are very worried that it's going to exceed that, and we are going to see the NHS be overwhelmed in a really critical condition. So I think there's going to be a lot of tug of war in government in the coming days. I think we need to wait for more Omicron data to come through. At the moment, it's still very early. There are some positive signs that while it's more transmissible, it's less likely to give people severe symptoms. So I think there's going to be a lot of wait and see, but certainly some gloomy headlines. And I don't think it's altogether surprising that some cabinet ministers are worried about what the implications might be.
Yeah, and Christina, the Sunday Times is reporting that one solution is to start getting injections into very young children, NHS staff ready to jab children as young as 5, because we know that school children really are driving cases, aren't they? I mean, do you think this is a good idea?
Well, look, obviously, I'm in no position to assess whether vaccinating children is a good idea. But if it's been shown to be safe for children, and other countries are doing this, and it looks as though the vaccines are safe for children, we vaccinate children against all kinds of other things, and COVID is going to be with us forever. So it probably is better that they get vaccinated when they're children, rather than have to go through 3 monthly boosters, as it looks as though we're currently going to have to do for the rest of our lives. So if the medics deem it safe, I think it is a good idea, because this thing is incredibly infectious, and it's going to be just passed round and round and round. And it doesn't even look as if, given that we know that people can be reinfected by Omicron if they had Alpha or Delta or Kent or any of the other variants, then we can easily have new variants every few months. And I imagine that the chances of children becoming immune to the coronavirus will be increased if they are vaccinated early. I mean, nobody thinks this is ideal, but if it keeps them safe, and it keeps our society safe in the long term, obviously that's to the good. But we are also, none of us, going to be safe until the whole world is vaccinated. And we are so very far from that I'm living currently in fear that the new virulent and possibly more dangerous annual variant is going to be our Christmas treat every year. And it doesn't seem like much of a Christmas treat to me.
No, you make a very good point. And finally, in this part, the front of the Observer, really sort of summing up what we've been talking about to a certain extent, Annabel. Scientists fear falling trust in Boris Johnson could harm the bid to curb the Omicron surge. I mean, they've done a very interesting poll which shows that by a large margin, that party or gathering, as it's also known in number 10, has really provoked anger and touched a nerve, far more so than the Barnard Castle episode, or indeed Matt Hancock. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think it's altogether surprising, because over the past 12 months since the January lockdown was implemented, we have had these cases of senior politicians or those who are very well connected finding ways of circumventing the rules, to the point where there has been this slogan out there, there's one rule for them and another for the rest of us. And this party just taps into the frustration that people feel, and the fact that they're worried that politicians, hold them in contempt almost and that they're not adhering to the rules that they're setting. So I don't think that it's altogether surprising. And of course, we're going to hear more and more. There's a story in the Mirror that I know we'll come on to later about these parties and events that were taking place while the rest of us were in tier 2 or perhaps even in lockdown. And we were all abiding by the rules. And it's immensely frustrating to hear that those who were setting the rules weren't abiding by them. I think that the main headline on the cover of the Observer is quite interesting. Just how much is Boris Johnson's falling popularity has punctured credibility, and the sense that many will feel that he won't be obeying the rules, even the rules that he sets this December. How much is that going to affect compliance? Because the suggestion here from behavioural scientists is that the government could have a real challenge on its hands in ensuring adherence to the rules. Yeah. And it's not altogether surprising, not just because of Partygate, but let's not forget that in December 2020, ministers told us we'd be free after 15 million jabs. In February, Boris Johnson set out that irreversible roadmap, and here we are reversing it. So I'm not altogether surprised that behavioural scientists are worried about compliance in view of the news that we've had this week.
Yeah, you mentioned Partygate. We'll talk about that more after the break. But Christina, just 20 seconds, if you could. I think there is a real worry now about fatigue, isn't there, about the restrictions? We all had our Christmases ruined last year. Do you get the sense that many people are saying, well, whatever happens, I'm going to make sure I see my loved ones this year?
Well, I haven't had that sense, particularly in talking to people, but I feel that. I really do feel that. I mean, I feel like a mark for following the rules because I was meticulous all the way through. And I've had so little, until we were allowed to, I had so little social life. I'm still very careful, but I do see friends. And if the rules change in such a way that I am not allowed to see good friends after lateral flow tests in the comfort of my own home, I'm not sure that I'm going to obey the rules, to be honest. I mean, you know, we were mugs for obeying the rules. Clearly, everybody at Downing Street was having parties all the time. So yeah. I think this has destroyed trust. Yeah.
OK. All right. Interesting. OK, let's carry on talking about parties. You're in the party mood. I can see, Christina, with your Christmas tree up behind you, all looking very festive. And the Mirror, which has led the way, really, hasn't it, on Partygate, has got another photograph, which it says is Boris Johnson holding a quiz. It's one Yule for us and another Yule for Boris, is what they say. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, it's an online quiz. They're all seated. They don't seem to be breaking any rules.
Well, I don't know what. I assume that Boris Johnson was staring out at could see what was. Who he was addressing, and from the report, that was an awful lot of people packed into Downing Street. It was not a virtual quiz, but I mean, who's the least bit surprised about this? Of course, if parties were going on at Downing Street, and it's very clear they were going on a lot, of course Boris Johnson knew about them. What I really want to know about, actually, and what I would like the Metropolitan Police to investigate, is the parties that allegedly went on in his own flat, in the 11 Downing Street flat, because there seem to have been, Dominic Cummings is very clear that they took place, particularly on the day that he left. And if Boris Johnson was having parties in his own residence, not just office parties, but in his own apartment, at the time when the nation was locked down and not spending time with their loved ones who were dying, then that really is something that we need to know about. I imagine he was, and I hope we'll find out and get that investigated by the police. OK, Annabel, we know investigations are going on into various parties. Do you think they'll get to the bottom of it?
I mean, I think it's unlikely. I think, don't get me wrong, that what they did was absolutely unconscionable. If they really were breaking the rules and having all these parties at Downing Street while the rest of us were adhering to the rules, there were people, terrible stories, including in the Mirror last weekend, of people whose relatives were dying in hospital alone because they weren't allowed to get there in time to see them and spend their last moments with them. And there's Number 10 having quizzes and drinks parties and cheese and wine. It's really, the optics are absolutely terrible, but the behaviour was absolutely terrible. So I hope that we do get to the bottom of it. I'm not sure it's the best use of police time to be investigating this. I wonder if there are other avenues that are worth exploring. But I know Christina touched on this. You know, Dominic Cummings sent a tweet yesterday saying also there's lots of pictures of parties which will inevitably get out, and the invite lists beyond Number 10 to other departments. So I can really see this story gathering steam. The House is rising on Thursday, but I don't think this is going to die down even over the festive period. I think that it's going to be a big story.
Yeah, just with regard to this latest story in the Mirror, Downing Street have issued a statement. This was a virtual quiz. Downing Street staff were often required to be in the office to work on the pandemic response, so those who were in the office for work may have attended virtually from their desks. The Prime Minister briefly took part virtually in a quiz to thank staff for their hard work throughout the year. Lots of the use of the word virtually there. Christina, Annabel, thank you both very much. We shall speak again